مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. رئاسة دونالد ترامب انقضى عليها أكثر من 100 يوم وبقيت الجمهورية. في واقع الأمر واحدة من أكثر القصص البوليسية إثارة للاهتمام في واشنطن هي من هو دونالد ترامب الحقيقي. ففي النهاية أول 100 يوم عرضت لنا أمثلة لأشخاص مختلفين يجلسون في المكتب البيضاوي. كان هناك دونالد ترامب الشعبوي الغاضب الذي وقع على أوامر تنفيذية لإلغاء إنجازات سلفه وحظر دخول المهاجرين واللاجئين. كان هناك دونالد ترامب صاحب الرؤية متحدثا بالطلاقة عن مستقبل برنامج الفضاء. كان هناك دونالد ترامب الجريح منتقدا القضاء الذين أصدروا إحكاما بحقه. كان هناك دونالد ترامب الجاد المهيب ملقيا خطابا مؤثرا في الاحتفال بذكرى الهولوكوست. وكان هناك دونالد ترامب المتصارع غير المستعد استعدادا جيدا والذي فشل في أول جهوده التشريعية الكبرى لإبطال قانون الرئيس أوباما للرعاية الصحية واستبداله. من هو دونالد ترامب الحقيقي؟ للإجابة عن هذا السؤال معنا اليوم لجنتنا التي تدعم الخبيرين السياسيين ستيف كليمنز ومات فايزر. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting with our panel of political experts to discuss the many faces of our president, Donald J. Trump. Steve, Matt, welcome.
Good to be with you.
So let's first get off our chest the obvious question. What's the biggest surprise for you for the first 100 days that have recently been concluded of the Trump administration? The biggest surprise, Matt?
I think for me, it's you had the sense of him coming in that Washington was going to totally be upended. Everything would be different. And 100 days in, it doesn't. There are some things that feel different, but largely, Trump is sort of adapting to Washington. I think more than Washington is adapting to him. There are some things that run counter to that, but I think in large part, Congress is still operating as Congress operates. And Trump is sort of learning a little bit the ways of Washington rather than sort of upending every single thing about this town.
So the swamp is capturing the
I
president.
think the swamp is still here.
I
Steve?
actually, in a very friendly, respectful way, completely disagree with Matt. And what I'm surprised by is actually Donald Trump's personal resilience at not changing. We see things about him, his obsession with how he thought, how big he won the election, or how many people came to the inauguration, and his imprecision and, I would call it sloppiness on a lot of things. His, the fact he's not traveled anywhere internationally, whereas every other U.S. president in 100 days has essentially gone out of the country. He is himself. Candidate Trump is President Trump. Now, everyone around him, I agree completely with Matt. But I'm surprised that Donald Trump, the man, is overwhelmingly this 70-year-old impulsive adolescent, and he hasn't changed yet. And so I do sort of see that differently. I keep hoping he'll grow up, particularly as we discuss national security issues. But this guy hasn't yet, and that's been really interesting.
Or is it, Matt, you want to come back one
I
time
think I
here?
agree with Steve that Trump himself hasn't changed, but that the city hasn't changed either.
Right.
And you had the sense of him sort of upending everything. I mean, just right after Election Day, it felt like he would come in and change NAFTA, change, repeal Obamacare, and our country would feel much different 100 days in. And I think Trump himself still is the same as Trump has always been, and I don't think he's ever going to change. But the city hasn't, sort of changed.
All right, very interesting. So I said at the outset that we want to look at the different faces, different aspects of Donald Trump's personality and how it reflects politics and policy. So let me ask you about a couple of these. Steve, what would you say is the best example of the populist, petulant Donald Trump that we saw quite a lot on the election campaign, but since he's come to the White House?
Well, I don't think he's succeeded in these things, but until recently we saw a potential standoff where the government might have been shut down over Donald Trump insisting that the Congress fund his wall, the wall that was there to sort of stop illegal immigrants coming in, and his obsession with the fact that we need to keep people that are unlike us, that are potential threats, out of the country. We saw this in his immigration bill. These were two issues of trying to sort of block. We used to call it the Muslim ban. They would call it, we're going to have extreme vetting for people from primarily Muslim from 6 countries. That his obsession with that feeds the populist concern about threats today and terrorism. And I think those are the big issues that he's been committed to. He's trying hard to deliver on. He's harassing and demonizing the judiciary. He's saying, I'll meet you in the Supreme Court, because now he has one thing he did succeed on is getting a conservative member appointed to the Supreme Court. So as things go there, he's likely to have, in many of these cases, a majority win on Supreme Court cases. That's been interesting to me. So he's been petulantly defiant in that area, and I think we're still seeing him dedicated to those agenda items.
Okay, so Matt, if this is the populist, petulant Donald Trump, what are a couple of examples of Donald Trump, the famous deal maker, the author of Art of the Deal, the great negotiator, the compromiser, if you will? Where is he there?
I think you've seen him in some of these things not fulfill some of the campaign promises. NATO, obsolete during the campaign, and not so much now. You've seen him sort of adapt, I think, a little bit on some of those issues. But I don't, there hasn't been a visible sign of him actually dealing. I was surprised a little bit. You thought of him doing the infrastructure bill, for example, trying to reach out to Chuck Schumer, use those New York connections to try and
the Senate
try and
majority.
do something. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, both from New York, with Trump. So you can imagine some sort of deal making with that. But he's not gone that road, and probably been a little bit surprised, especially with healthcare, the way that's gone down with a failure to repeal Obamacare. They're still working on that, and I think we're seeing his deal making potentially in progress. If they do
Yes.
something on that. So I think he's maybe toward the tail end of the 100 days, he's starting to learn a little bit about that.
You haven't seen. I hate to put it in this way. We haven't seen fanatical idiocy from Donald Trump on healthcare. He pulled he made it look like he was never going to pull this healthcare vote. He was going to force the Republicans to go through a process and hang this on them. And then he pulled it back. So we did see, and that pulling back was a part of an art of the deal. The one thing he's been proactively totally consistent on is, I find Donald Trump mostly reactive, interesting, but where he's been very consistent is on trade. He, despite having a lot of Goldman Sachs globalists around him who believe in kind of the global ease at money moving around, that's not where he's at. He basically pulled the plug on TPP. One of his deal-making things is he's pulled the plug, or was going to pull the plug and take the United States out of NAFTA, and then said that the President of Mexico, the Prime Minister of Canada, called and I have agreed, now we can negotiate, but if we don't get a good deal, we'll get out of it. That's interesting. So he is keeping very consistent his aversion to kind of global trade deals that he think undermine. And he's actually told South Korea, in the moment where we're like in a potential meltdown with North Korea in a potential military thing of some sort down the road, he tells the South Koreans, who are most likely, one of the key parties, our allies, and potential victims of whatever happens, oh, by the way, the U.S.-South Korea deal is horrible and terrible, and I want us out of it while this is all going on. So you don't know what is bluster in some cases and what is deal making, but I find him consistent in that one area.
China is another example, I think, where he, the currency manipulation, he was going to tag China with that.
But that was a fake issue.
Right.
They've been popping up their currency for a year and a half.
But so he uses that sort of rhetoric, and then threatens China in some way, and now sort of is trying to get them to move a little bit on North Korea. So you have a sense of him trying to have those personal relationships with some of these world leaders, like the Chinese president, where to his credit, he's quite good at building some of those relationships. So I think that's one area where you're not seeing it maybe in the first 100 days, but you may see those dividends later
The one
on.
thing I would add, which is showing a bit of Donald Trump's naivete, though, about his position, is that one of the biggest criticisms of George W. Bush that remains after his presidency is having said that he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and saw his soul. And it has stayed, as a criticism of Bush ever since. And I think Donald Trump is unaware of that exchange between Bush and Putin, because he's been saying almost the same thing about Xi Jinping of China. And of the one, recently there were 100 senators that were marched to the White House to get classified briefings on North Korea, and I've talked to both Republican and Democratic senators there. Donald Trump came over for a few minutes to talk to them and assured everyone that he had a relationship and understood Xi Jinping, and the two of them had a connection. And all these senators saying, oh my gosh, he doesn't remember the Bush-Putin thing. So there's an element of naivete where Donald Trump is unaware of the history of that office and other behaviors, because he's committing some of the same mistakes.
Have we ever seen in the first 100 days Donald Trump project either the visionary president or the solemn, serious, humble president? All aspects of the presidency that we look for in our leaders. Matt, what do you think?
I think the other day, Holocaust Remembrance Day was a moment where Donald Trump, sort of seemed presidential in some ways, talking about the Holocaust in a way that, frankly, the White House has struggled with,
But the release they put out is a completely opposite. I mean, so coming out and speaking about what has happened historically, but then his own press office fails to mention the Jewish community that was slaughtered by the millions, and they said, well, a lot of people were harmed. So I cannot.
That was the original one.
What's
that?
that?
Was from January.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
so I think Trump himself speaking in those kind of terms. I mean, that day felt a little bit different than Sean Spicer, referring to concentration camps as Holocaust centers. I mean, there's clearly within the White House a struggle to talk about, that issue. But Trump himself, I thought, the other day seemed a little bit more, empathetic and speaking about those things. It seemed like
I was actually quite
presidential
impressed
You were.
I was.
I guess there were two rounds, and I led the round in
second
the
one.
first round. But I think the other thing
Was there a visionary moment that you have seen of Donald Trump?
I haven't seen vision from Donald Trump other than I give him credit. I know it may sound odd, but his slogan about Make America Great Again is something about uplifting. It is reaching people that haven't considered them part of the political process or being at the table. And I have to give him credit. When you read the critiques of Hillary Clinton that ran against her, she didn't have that uplifting message. She didn't have a message that her team had understood was where they were going. So I give him credit for that sort of, if you can call it, vision. What I find more interesting about Donald Trump, and I do give him credit for, is when it's come down to the Syria attack, or when it's come to showing restraint at key moments, like when the North Koreans have launched a couple of missiles. He didn't overreact in those moments, and I think he struggles with it because I think he wants to overreact, but he's demonstrated a greater resolve and discipline than I thought. That may not count as vision, but it does count as sobriety, and I give him credit for sobriety at some of the right moments.
Okay, we're going to have to hold off on sobriety.
Well, I mean sobriety in the non-alcoholic
not the highest
sense.
bar
Yeah.
for our president.
Right.
We'll come back with more discussion about President Trump's first 100 days in just a moment. Our guests today include Steve Clemens. Steve is the Washington editor-at-large for one of America's premier news, opinion, and literary magazines, The Atlantic, and editor of Atlantic Live. He's also a senior fellow and founder of the American Strategy Program at the New American Foundation, a prominent think tank here in Washington. Steve writes and speaks frequently about the Washington political scene, foreign policy, and national security issues. Also with us is Matt Visor. Matt is the Deputy Washington Bureau Chief for the venerable Boston Globe, where he also covers national politics. Matt covered both the 2016 and 2012 presidential campaigns, as well as reporting on Congress, with a special focus on Massachusetts, of course. In addition, he's a coffee connoisseur and writes about it in a special column in the Globe. A graduate of the University of North Carolina, hiss, he has been at the Globe since 2004. So, gentlemen, I would just want to pick up with one thing that Steve was referring to, and that is the use of force under President Trump. We've seen him use it at least once, actually twice, I correct, Yemen and in Syria. What can we say about the decision-making that went into this? Is there a Trump doctrine, or is it more ad hoc? Matt, what do you think?
Trump doctrine is interesting. I mean, he is unpredictable. I mean, you don't know sort of where his lines are. And to your point earlier about visionary, in most of those strikes, he did not speak afterwards. He left it to his advisors to sort of explain what was going on and why the United States was getting involved. He was not as articulate about why we're getting involved in Syria, for example. He alluded to the images, that we were seeing of the chemical weapons attacks in Syria and that affecting him. But there wasn't sort of any larger articulation of his foreign policy views and how this fits into that. So I think that that's something that is still a work in progress about what it is that Trump, what his red lines are.
Okay, Steve, a Trump doctrine?
Yeah, I think there is a Trump doctrine. It's still evolving, but I think we see the contours of it. The Trump doctrine is pretty similar to how he behaves in politics. He is king of the hill, and if he sees someone challenging him, he wants to clobber them. And I think this is what we would call a Jacksonian impulse in foreign policy, that he's willing to take on a threat, deploy force, do something fast, but he has zero interest in deploying American resources, diplomats, money to help build that state after. He has no interest in regime change generally in any of these countries. He doesn't want America bogged down in lots of commitments, but he's willing to cross that line and deploy force to attack or clobber someone who's bad out there, but then he pulled back to Fortress America. It's a very, very Jacksonian, what we call Jacksonian element of foreign policy. I think it is interesting because I think none of his national security advisors around him share that. So it's interesting. They try and smooth it out and blend it and have lots of concerns about women's rights in the world or the health of democracy, what the effects of alliances are. But Donald Trump is someone who works at a much more simple level. He doesn't want to take on problems. He doesn't want to chase monsters, which was a reference to I think John Adams early on, that we're not going to chase monsters around the world, and wants to pull back and just defend America.
Okay, so you referred to people around the president. I want to ask you a bit about that. In the first 100 some odd days, has anyone emerged as the hero around Donald Trump, the person that Donald Trump talks to and relies on more than any other, emerging as the consigliere of Donald Trump more than any other cabinet or non-cabinet official? Matt?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is Jared Kushner certainly has a huge amount of power.
This is the president's son-in-law.
36-year-old son-in-law. Lots of experience in all matters, by the way. Yeah.
as a developer in New York, and but yeah, no government experience, and so Jared Kushner seems to be exerting a lot of control. You saw for a period Jared Kushner kind of warring with Steve Bannon, who was Trump's strategic advisor during the campaign and came in with a lot of authority within the White House. And for a while there was sort of warring internally and a little bit externally, over control. But it seems like Jared Kushner has kind of been a key figure so far in this White House.
I think Jared Kushner definitely is a balancer, a balancing force. I think that on the national security front, it's been interesting and unexpected that H.R. McMaster, General H.R. McMaster, who's the national security advisor, whom we thought, and you and I have discussed this in the past, didn't think he would come in with a big permit to make change, to come in. H.R. McMaster has achieved more in a shorter period of time with structure, process, discipline, creating an apparatus there that didn't exist before, and exporting at least some of the people who were more chaotic in that, like K.T. McFarland, who was the former Deputy National Security Advisor. They're sending her very rapidly now to become ambassador to Singapore and getting her out of the way. I didn't think at the beginning that McMaster would get time in Donald Trump land. He didn't even have what they call walk-in rights. of being able to walk in on the president, which was unheard of. And now that's all changed. So he's been someone that the president has learned to value and trust in a way that is unexpected.
So the administration is famously understaffed in certain departments, especially the State Department, which to this date I think still has not a single appointee other than the secretary officially. Is this, in your view, strategy or happenstance?
I think a lot of it is strategy to sort of hamstring different parts of government that are not priorities for the president. Wanting to sort of reduce government.
Well, we do know in the second 100 days the president will be going abroad quite a lot. Europe, the Middle East, so the pictures will certainly be on him
Let's
around
see if that
the world.
really happens, though.
All right, so we're going to have to hold it there, and we will, next time we're together, we'll be able to judge whether it really happened and what meaning it has. So thank you very much, Matt and Steve. Thank you for joining us in Dakhel, Washington. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول الأوجه الكثيرة للرئيس ترامب، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.